Well, I was interrupted, so I had to start again. Sorry about that. So there'll be 2 videos. Probably just as well I kind of rambled on the first one. But this is complicated stuff. And I believe that the actions of Gates and Crowley will get sorted out in the end. Those 2 men and several witnesses know exactly what went on. And I'm sure the more they're both removed from the incident, the clearer their recollections will be. And I expect them to get together soon. I've predicted that it'll be within 2 weeks. And basically put their arms around each other and say, you know, he's not a racist and he's not a rogue. And, you know, it was the heat of the moment sort of thing. But the question others have, such as Morris, is, yeah, okay, heat of the moment, all this, why did it have to lead to an arrest? Why, you know, the sergeant overreacted, things of this nature. I'm sorry, that there's no evidence of that whatsoever. There's no evidence. I mean, the closest we have, the absolute closest we have to anything that sticks to the sergeant at all in all of this, other than the fact that he eventually arrested the professor, is Gates' accusation that Crowley refused to properly identify himself. If you've listened to the radio interview, you know Sergeant Crowley says it's an unusual request since he's wearing his badge and his name tag. But if he needed more information, if he needed to see more ID, the professor did. Crowley said if that was what it was going to take to resolve this matter and get this man to comply, then it was worth doing. And he was reaching for his identification when Professor Gates moved in another direction. I believe he went to get some ID of his own. But in other words, Crowley says he was preparing to show. Maybe the professor went to get something to write with, I don't know. But in any case, Sergeant Crowley directly refutes the accusation that he refused to properly identify himself. In fact, he was in full uniform with his badge and his name tag visible. So it was Sergeant Crowley's confusion, if you will. There's just, what more do I need to do to prove that I'm who I say I am? The Crowley badge, you know, figure it out. But by all accounts, I mean, really, even by the professor's own account, he was, I won't say hysterical, but shall we say agitated. There's no evidence whatsoever that Crowley was ever agitated. And Morris, with all due respect, you don't know what his state of mind was, and the evidence that we have is that it was calm. Gates never indicated that Crowley was not calm, and Crowley represents that he was. So you've got nothing to refute the, you know, assertion, if you will, that Crowley behaved as a professional police officer should behave. And that it seems clear by now that Gates behaved, I won't say crazy, a little off the hook. Other witnesses, including a black officer, said that it was strange. It didn't make sense under the circumstances. I think, and I have from really first hearing of this, that the professor wigged out. And here's my real problem. Here's my real problem. I can't seem to get anybody who started off believing that this was racially motivated. I can't get anybody who started off there to come back to where it seems this thing belongs. And I want to know why that is. I want to know why we're not condemning Gates for declaring the sergeant a racist, a charge that was clearly false, and a charge that, you know, President Obama spoke to the sergeant personally. Now, he kind of had to because of the mess he made, but he came away with a very strong impression that this is a good man, a fine officer, implying that he probably did his job well at that moment. Although he later tried to have it both ways in his little briefing and say that there's no way that the professor should have been dragged down to the station. I guess they could have driven him around the block and said, "Are you ready to calm down?" and then let him, let him out of the cuffs and let him go back home. I guess they could have done that, but at what point do you have to, stop caretaking a grown man? I mean, I understand that there is an obligation there to help the professor calm back down and to give him the time and space to do that. What I'm saying is it seems as though they did that and he still wouldn't calm down. So at what point do you have an obligation as a police officer to act on your training? You've given this man as much slack as you can. There's a crowd being stirred by this man's rantings, which is what I believe the report will show. I'm sorry. I need some people to come back towards me. Gates should not have done what he did. He should have complied. There was nothing unreasonable about any of the officer's requests. Start off with the fact that he was there by himself, and the report was that there were two people having broken into the house. He could only see one of them. He didn't know if there was an accomplice. He didn't know if Gates was a victim. He didn't know if Gates was even aware of the report of 2 people. He knew nothing. The safest place for both of them was outside of the house, where Crowley could assess the situation without, corners involved, and where help would soon be arriving in the form of backup. Nothing improper, nothing unusual. If Professor Gates didn't understand, he should have asked why, not no, I will not. You see how just completely wrong that is, right from the start. Rather than just try to understand what he's dealing with, Gates just simply refuses to cooperate at all. I need some people to come back toward me and condemn that behavior and condemn the words he spoke to Sergeant Crowley, who by all accounts was completely professional the entire time and never instigated Gates in any way. Certainly never used any language towards him that should have been considered inflammatory, and who gave the man several opportunities to comply with his request to calm down or go back inside. You want to know why the police didn't leave? Are they supposed to tuck their tails while a man is berating them and insisting that he's been mistreated? Are they supposed to simply back away? Is that really what we're saying here? And let me ask you this, if anyone who says that, let me ask you this. Under what other circumstance would you expect the police to behave that way? Would you expect them to behave that way if you were the one inciting them, or if I was? My problem with the way others are handling this is that their positions become more and more absurd as the facts come out more and more. And of course, the chief absurdist is the president, who declared the acts of the Cambridge police stupid while admitting he didn't have all the facts, who later basically had to call the officer to provide a mea culpa. Whether it was actually an apology or not, we don't know yet. But who still has not backed away from his assertion that citizens are free to interpret the actions of police officers, A, based on whether or not they consider them valid, and B, based on degrees of racial sensitivity that may or may not have been expressed. This is the chief law enforcement officer of the land. I blogged about this today. It's absurd. He needs to undo what he did. He needs to say, I fully respect law enforcement. I expect all people to comply with lawful police orders. In this situation, these orders were lawful and Professor Gates should have complied. Furthermore, I condemn, this should be Obama speaking, furthermore, I condemn Professor Gates calling Sergeant Crowley a racist for doing his job. That's all I have for now. I'm looking forward to any and all feedback on this. There's a lot to work out. This is Walt. Take care.